So I recently received a message from a lovely patron asking about a Johnny Harris map. And this specific map, it happens to be one of my favorites as well. It was a map that Johnny created for his video, how the U.S. stole Hawaii, how Hawaii was stolen by the U.S. I'm not sure the title. However, at the intro or at the beginning sequence of that video, there are a lot of like 3D maps of the terrain of like the islands with another map overlaid, and there's like these cool transitions in between, like a sat map with 3D terrain, and then it like transitions on an older map, and it's really cool. And I've always wondered how he did it, and the patron was asking the same question. So today I'm going to try to create it in geolayers. I'm like 99% sure he created this using geolayers. All right, let's just get into it. I'm inside of After Effects here. I'm going to go to Window, Extensions, and I'm going to open up GeoLayers 3. Now, to create like landscape and to be able to do like 3D terrain, there's one of 3 additional plugins, expensive plugins, that you're going to need to do this effect. So right over here, before I even create a map comp, you'll see there's this button that says Create 3D Landscape. So I'm not going to create a map comp. I'm going to start by pushing this button, because this automatically sets up a GeoLayers project that is very specific. It has a controller comp, and it's set up in a specific way that's different from the normal map comp. So it's important that you click this first, and we'll call this Johnny Harris Oahu map. Make this 4K. Now these are the plugins that you can use, and this essentially, all 3 of these are going to allow you to do like vertical displacement of a plane, to take the plane and to be able to displace it, which is going to give you that 3D terrain. I have Metal Freeform Pro, so I'm going to go ahead and click on that. That's going to set up the project. Now this is the specific map that I'm going to be recreating. It's this map of Oahu. I'm pretty sure I've seen this map before on the David Rumsey collection. I know that Johnny goes here all the time to find his maps. This is like one of the #1 map repositories in the world. So over here on davidrumsey.com, I'm going to search for Oahu. Okay, and it already looks like some of these were in his video. So if you don't know about here it is. If you don't know about this website, definitely check it out. It has just some of the most incredible maps. The website is really well put together. So this is the map that he used here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on Export, and you can actually choose a resolution here. And I'll go ahead and select extra large. I don't want it to be huge because it'll bog down my system a little bit. And then I'm going to grab this image and throw it into my After Effects project. Okay, so now I've got this 3D project set up, and what this consists of, if you look here, we have like this terrain, super low res, because it's currently set to quarter. But what I want to do is I want to position my map directly over Oahu. So with the controller map comp selected, actually let's go look at the project. It has a controller, which inside has a texture map comp, which has this height map comp. So with the controller comp selected, I'm going to type in Oahu, which is the island in Hawaii, and I'm just going to click on this button that'll bring it directly over, and that's right where I want to be. Now I'm going to switch this to full resolution, and I'm going to hold Control and click Finalize, and we're going to see how this looks. Okay, there's a bunch of problems with the satellite imagery of the ocean here, so I'm going to go ahead and zoom out by 1 level, and then I'm going to refinalize. A lot of the times when you have satellite imagery issues, to avoid having to like Photoshop out everything or cover it up, you can simply move a scale level, and then it will have some imagery that works. The satellite imagery doesn't match his perfectly, but that doesn't matter. To place the imagery, I got to jump into the texture freeform map comp. This is the texture map comp. If you go over to Effect Controls, you can see this is where the Metal Freeform Pro effect is applied. And in fact, there's an elevation slider right here. And this is where I can control my terrain. So if I bump my terrain up here, you can see that it's affecting this here. So if I crank it way up, you can see these mountains are just going to grow and grow. So I'll set that back to 100, but I'm probably going to want to bring that up a little bit. And I'm going to be adding some lights, just make it look a little bit better. But let me jump into this map comp, and now you can see this is the flat imagery here. This is the comp where I want to place my other imagery. So I'm going to go grab this Oahu map. I'm just going to drop it over. And now I'm going to scale it down a little bit. And I want to position this as close as possible. So I'm going to hold Shift and hit T to bring up opacity, and then I'm going to bring the opacity down so I can see the other map underneath it. And Now to line these up, I'm going to grab the anchor point of my image here. So I'm going to grab the pan behind tool, which is also known as the anchor point tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the anchor point directly over this little peninsula right here. So that'll help me align this. I'll bring the opacity back down. So now you can see if I zoom in right here, the anchor point's like right on this. And now what I can do is I can grab the selection and I can just position this right over here. And now it's going to be easier to keep track of. When I come over here, I'm going to start to scale it. And if you hold the control key, that'll scale it on like a, that'll give you like a more fine-tuned adjustment. And in fact, I need to turn the resolution down so this will be more responsive. Depending on your system, this project can be kind of slow. Okay, looks pretty close. Now what I want to do is I'm going to grab this and then I'm going to grab my texture map comp here. And with this selected, I'm going to pin this so that we'll pin this to here. So if I move that controller comp at all, I don't want that to be offset or lose its positioning. And now I can also do scale with map, rotate with map, and make sure that it's set to 3D. Shouldn't matter because I don't think I'm going to be moving this too much. Okay, now when I go back to my main map comp, you can now see that that image will populate, and we now can start to see a little bit of the displacement here. So now it's starting to look more like Johnny's map. Okay, now what I want to do is I'm going to right click and I'm going to add a new light. And I'm going to add an ambient light and set the intensity to something like 50. Click OK. And as soon as you add that, it's going to just use the lighting. So everything's set up. I don't need to change any other settings. And you can see that that's about 50% ambient. And now I'm going to go right click, add another light, and this time we'll add let's add a spotlight. And the intensity for this one, let's do 100. And we just want to tweak some of the settings here. We want to make sure it's casting shadows. And I can tweak all these a little bit later, so I'll just go ahead and see what it looks like. Again, this is pretty intense on your system here, so be ready. Okay, so this is super bright, but what I can do is I can click off and then I can click and grab it again. It's a good way to work with a spotlight, and drag it out this way. And I just want to position it in a way that it's going to just give me some fall off or show me some shadows on these mountains. So now I can start to see some definition here. It's still too bright. So let's bring the intensity down to something like 75. And you can really play with this lighting all day. It's kind of insane. I'm going to reopen up the intensity of the ambient and just bump that up by another 10%. Okay, I can bump it up even further. So now we're getting really close. This is pretty much, I'm pretty sure now this is what he did. However, if you notice, Johnny didn't have these edges, so maybe what he did was his pre-comp texture tiling was larger, or he scaled it up or something to get rid of these edges. And it also looks like he attached another image of that bookshelf in one of these and used he might have had some to make it look like it's on a table and to make it look like it's actually in an office or some kind of workroom. And from what I know, Johnny always has he spends so much time on his maps and they're so intricate. They're really hard to reverse engineer when you don't know what was going on. But my patron asked if he created this in Blender, and I'm very, very sure that he did not. I'm pretty sure he did not. So now I just want to bump up the displacement here, and looks like it could still be scaled up a little bit. So I'll go back and grab this texture map comp, and we'll bump up the elevation to like 150. Oh, there we go. Let's go up to 200 and really exaggerate it. So now we can start to see some shadow over here. That's looking cool. And now the way that you control the movement of this platform here, this comp, is with these three adjustment layers here. So you have, or null objects. You can control the pitch with the X rotation. So if I go to rotation here and I mess with X rotation, we can pitch it down even further. That's looking cool. Here, if you mess with the Z rotation, you can control the bearing, so I can spin it around. And then the camera elevation, you can look at the Z position here. So if I move the Z position, it's going to move this whole thing up and down. Okay, so there you go, Suzanne. I hope that answered your question. Obviously, Johnny's map, again, is a lot more detailed. You have like the projector going on it, and then it animates on and off. Animating on and off, you would just come in here to the actual image, this pinned image, and you could add like a wipe, and then, time the wipe. So for example, you could come in here and grab the rectangle tool, grab the map, and you could just apply a mask to it. And you would animate the mask path. So you come here like to the 1 second mark and then add a keyframe to mask path. Let's move it over here actually. And then, just come in here like that. So now it's animating on. And then I could feather that a little bit. If you want to feather, there's a mask feather right here. So you can add a little bit of a feather if you want. And then you can keyframe these as well. Add some easy ease. And then come over here and let's just do some kind of animation here with like the pitch. So let's say we're going to animate the pitch here. So it's going to go from 0 to 60. So we'll be looking straight down on it. I know it's not exactly like Johnny's, but hey, for 15 minutes, that was pretty darn good. See you in the next one. Alright, this is going to be a fun one. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to map out one of Vasco da Gama's routes. So I'm going to set up a new project here. We'll create a new map comp. Click next. I'm going to go ahead and choose Bing Aerial Imagery, create new map comp. Now I actually have a reference image that I pulled from Encyclopedia Britannica, which shows one of his routes here. It shows his first voyage to India between 1497 and 1499. Now let's break this down step by step. So first I'm going to grab this image and I'm going to bring it into the map composition here. And what I want to do is georeference it. So I want to line it up with the existing map comp imagery. So with the map comp, I'm going to zoom in to Africa here. And now I'm going to grab this image, bring it to the top, and hit T to show the opacity, and then hold Shift and hit S to show scale. Now I need to line up the map loosely at a specific location so that I can move the anchor points to that location and start to try to georeference this and make sure that everything's lined up perfectly. So first I'm going to bring the opacity down so we can see the underlying geolayers map. And then I'm going to hold Control and hit Finalize. So we got some high-res imagery that we can look at here. And I'm going to use the Horn of Africa as a reference to line these up. So I'm going to grab my anchor point tool. And with my reference image, I'm going to go grab the anchor point and move it to the Horn of Africa. And I'm doing this so that when I scale it, I know that it's going to scale from this exact location. And any rotations, it's just a good point of reference. With that in place, now I'm going to line up the image with the geolayers map imagery here, something like that. And now you can see I just need to scale it up a little bit. So grab scale here. Now to do some fine-tune scaling, you can hold Control. And now this is looking great. I'm going to turn up the opacity and we can just toggle the visibility on and off to see here. And this is looking great. Now I actually want to attach it to my map. For that, I will grab the parent pick whip and attach it to the anchor, the map comp anchor here, and then I'll set it to 3D. And now this image is attached. So if I decide to zoom the map and reposition it, it's always going to stay attached. Be aware that if you're doing all this work and you have an image that takes a long time to georeference, be sure that you connect it to your map, because if you do all that georeferencing work and then you zoom out, move around, you can cause yourself a big headache. One other kind of cool thing that you can do is you can actually turn this image into a map feature. So you can grab the image layer here and go over and click Add Features to Browser, Feature from Layer. And now check this out. It actually creates a little square shape. Now, why would you want to do this? Well, let's say you zoom out and you're over here and you want to perfectly frame this up. You can just double click on the map feature now, which is very cool. And also, if you're looking at the map here, you can now look at the feature properties and it's going to show you the area, circumference, some pretty cool data points here that you might want to look at. All right, now with this selected, I'm going to use this to trace out this path. So I'm going to go grab my pen tool. I'm going to make sure I don't have any other layers selected. And I'm going to go over here and just start to trace this out loosely. You can see that it starts here and it goes this way via these arrows here and goes around. And this is going to take a little bit of time. So I'm going to speed this up. So if it looks like I'm going insanely fast, it's because I've sped it up in post here. Now as I place these points, I'm clicking and dragging to make sure that they have these little Bezier handles Also, if you click and drag and then hold Alt, you can move them independently. Now at the end here, it's important not to close the path by clicking on the first path. You want to keep it separate. So click it over here and then kind of drag it over this way, because if you close the path, it's going to cause some problems a little bit later on. All right, so I've drawn this path now, and it's not actually attached to the map. So one thing that I probably should have done is I could have gone over here and clicked Create Shape Layer to draw on, and that's a great way to automatically have it attached to the map as I draw it out. However, this is still in place now, and what I can do is click Add Features to Browser and create a feature from layer, and now I have the actual path here. And so if I move it around, I can just redraw it straight from here. However, I do want to attach this one, so I'm going to go ahead and attach it here. Turn it to 3D. I'll call this one Vasco da Gama Route Original, just so if I need to come back at any point and make any changes, I'll know where it's at. I'm gonna go ahead and lock this off. And I'm gonna redraw this route with my new map feature over here. So to do that, I need to select an actual layer style. So let's just do a simple white path right now. I'm gonna go ahead and just select one of these defaults here. I'm gonna go to Edit Styles to see, let's turn up the width a little bit, maybe 14. And in the parameters here, I want to make sure that Simplify Geometry is set to max zoom. If you have it turned off, it's going to draw way too many vertices. If it's at current zoom, it's not going to draw enough. So I think that max zoom is in general a good in-between spot here. I'll go ahead and keep all these other parameters turned off. And now with this selected, I want to animate this. So I'm going to bring my playhead to the beginning, and then I'll click Draw Feature, Animate Feature Path. And then I'm going to create an 8-second animation. And that draws out the route here. And to see this, I'm going to turn off our reference image. Go ahead and lock that off as well so we don't grab it. Now if I play this back, we should see a route animating on screen. There we go. All right, now it's time to stylize a few things. First, we'll start with this base map. So I'm going to go over to the effects and presets, and I'm going to go grab an effect called Hue Saturation. I'm going to drag that and drop it on top of my world map comp. I'm going to completely desaturate this. I'm going to bring master saturation down to -100, and then I'm going to start to pump up the lightness just so that it gives me this look here. So we'll do something like 70. I want to add a little bit of texture to this, maybe change the color a little bit. So I have this texture image here, which is just some old paper. I'm going to bring this into my project. If you want to download this, it's available with the project files and the map data files over on Teachable. So with this, I'm just going to drag it on the top here, and it's like this vertical orientation. So I'm going to hit W for rotate, hold shift to snap it, and then I'm just going to rotate it by 90 degrees here. Now I want to blend this in. So to blend it in, I'm going to go to modes here, just toggle switches in modes if you don't see it, and I'm going to go grab linear burn. Okay, that's looking good. Now we got some texture. I'm going to go ahead and grab the texture image, and we're going to attach it to the map comp anchor so that it follows along. And now I will toggle 3D button on. I think I'm actually going to add a vignette as well. So we'll go to CC vignette right here. I'm going to apply this directly to the world map comp. And the default looks pretty good. It's nice and subtle. If you want it to be more dramatic, you can pump up the amount and the angle of view, and it can get, quite contrasty. You can also move around the center. Sometimes I even animate this to follow along with the path. It can give you a really cool and dramatic look, which might be cool for this particular scenario. But I'm going to go ahead and stay with that. And now I want to focus on the route, because the route definitely needs some work here. So first, what I want to do is I'm going to change the color of this. So I'm going to go grab the route shape layer and go click directly here on stroke color. And I'm just going to bring this down. We'll bring brightness down to 9 so that we got this black color, but it's not pure black. And the stroke width is much too thick here, so I'm going to bring that down by about half. You also want to be aware that when you're drawing this out with geolayers, it is, if you have, so if we go back over to the panel here, if you have auto stroke width selected, it's going to add an expression to that, and it makes it a little bit complicated to change, so just be aware of that. Now I want to jump into the actual stroke parameters. So if you go to the shape layer in the contents here, you can find a stroke group, and I'm going to go down to line join, and I'm going to switch that to round so that it rounds off the edges here. So it's looking better. It's still not perfect, and that is because it's actually looking a little too uniform. So I want to add some effects to this to really roughen up the edges and just, distort it out a little bit. So one thing that I like to do here is pre-comp it, because when you're doing zooms and moving pixels around, some effects, don't move along with these vector elements. But if you pre-comp them, it treats them as raster elements and it will stick to the actual layer as it moves. So as I animate this map, I don't want the effects to be wiggling around. So one way to do this is to pre-comp it. And as you know, if you've tried this, pre-comping in geolayers is a little bit difficult because it's attached to the map comp anchor. If you pre-comp it, it can be thrown out of sync with everything. That's why I like to leave animating the map comp as my last step so that nothing gets thrown off here. So what I'm going to do is to pre-comp this. You can actually use this script right here. It says run script, and you can do pre-compose feature shape layer, and that's going to pre-comp this. But if you notice, it just shifted it over a little bit. And I find this is not perfect. This is one of the problems with this script. And now if I even jump in here, you'll notice that with the pre-comp, it goes straight to the edges. So as you apply effects, sometimes they'll bleed out over, which isn't perfect. It's not a perfect scenario, because then if you try to change the composition here, it really throws everything completely out of whack. So I'm going to go ahead and undo this. What I like to do is I like to turn off 3D, and then I like to disconnect this so that then you can manually pre-comp this. So go to layer, pre-compose, and we'll just have this named. Let's go to gamma route. And the reason you detach it from the parent, you detach the parent, you turn off 3D, is so that this stays in place here. And now your pre-comp can be reattached to the map comp anchor, and then you can turn on 3D again. Once again, this is not going to work if you have it pitched or you move the map comp at all. So just be aware of that. So now if I jump into this pre-comp, you can see we have this and we have some room to play with here. And now I can go over here to the effects and presets panel, and I can search for rough and edges, and I can apply this directly to the pre-comp of this route, which is going to treat it as a raster element. So now we're starting to get some nice rough edges here, and now I can just start to play around with this. All right, so I'll bring the complexity up to 10, and now I'll bring the border down to something like 4. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Now, once again, if you do have any problems in this project, I imagine it's going to be with one of these effects, because once you start to use vectors instead of pre-comps, or you start to apply effects to vectors and then start to move them around, it can give you some weird results that can be a little difficult to control. Once again, hence why I used this pre-composition. All right, now I'm going to go grab the text tool, and we're going to add a title here, Vasco da Gama. I'm going to select this. We'll bump it up to like 300 maybe. Let's reposition it here. And I've got this nice black color, which is looking good, matches the path route. However, this font is not really appropriate for this. So I'm going to switch to a font that I got from Adobe Fonts called Emily Austin. It's this nice script here. And I'm going to pump this up even more, maybe 500. Now, if you want to get this font, you can go over to this website, Adobe Fonts, and this is really cool. You can log in with your Adobe ID, and then you can, let me search this font here. So Emily Austin is right here, and what's cool is once you found the font, you can just click on this activate button, and through Creative Cloud, it'll automatically sync up, and then you can come back here to After Effects, and it will be available. You might need to close the panel, reopen it, or close After Effects, reopen it, so that it populates. And now I'm going to go ahead and attach this to my world map comp anchor, set it to 3D, and we can reposition it a little bit later. All right, now I need some imagery of Vasco da Gama to include in the animation. So I came over here to Wikipedia, where there are a bunch of different very cool illustrations and different visuals. So I'm going to go with this one right here. I'm going to bring this into Adobe Photoshop. And what I will do is I'll grab the marquee tool with the layer selected. I'll click on select and mask, and then I'll click on this button that says select subject. And then depending on the amount of time you have, you can refine these edges here. I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and then hold Control and hit J. And I'm going to turn off our background layer here. So now we have a selection. I'm not too worried about all this crap down here because I'm going to basically just use the top half of him. And now with this transparency here, I can export this out. So go to File, Export, quick export as PNG, and the PNG image format will retain the transparency. So when I bring it over into Adobe After Effects, so this will be a transparent background, which is what I need. So now bring this imagery over in here, and I can drop this on top of everything. So now we have our Vasco da Gama right here. I'll just scale this up and kind of position it right over here. And it's looking a little washed out. So I'm going to go to Effects and Presets, and we're going to grab a Curves effect. I'll drop that on the image. And now I'm just going to give it a little bit more contrast by adding a very subtle S-curve here. And now I do not want to attach this to my map, nor do I want to make it 3D. I want this to be in the foreground, and I'm going to have it just subtly moving from left to right. As this map comp animates and all the other elements follow the map, I want him to be separate and just kind of slightly drift. So I don't need him to, well, he can be 3D, but he doesn't need to be. All right, so I'm ready to do some animation of the map. I'm going to go back to the geolayers panel, and let's just see what happens if I pitch this out a little bit, maybe zoom. We're going to see any issues right away. And first of all, you can see that we can see past the edges of our actual texture here. So to get around that, I'm going to grab our map comp, and I'm going to toggle these switches and modes back to be able to see our track matte. And we're going to use this actual paper texture as a matte here. So click on that, and we'll use that as an alpha matte. And right away, it gives us those nice edges, or it gives us the alpha edges. You can see toggle transparency. However, it immediately and by default turns off the texture. So simply turn that back on, and now we have this. So this will be a 10-second animation. So at the end here, we want to make sure that our route is nicely framed up here. So we'll make sure that this is zoomed in properly and that he's not blocking any of the actual route here, and that the text can actually be seen. Let me see if I can crank the text back down a little bit. It's a little too big. So I'll go ahead and add some keyframes here to the 10-second mark. And I want to make sure these are linear keyframes, because it by default will add them with ease. So I'm just going to control click these, and now we'll go back over here and we'll click or we'll basically select our starting position. So we'll pitch it down a little bit so that there's a pitch move, and then maybe it will be zooming out a little bit. So, and we'll go ahead and add keyframes to all these again, grab them all. Now I'm going to animate old Vasco here, this image. So we'll just do a simple position keyframe him here for the starting position, and then we want him to end up just simply over here. So there's some very subtle movement, but we still want it to be framed up nicely. So I can quickly scrub through this to see what we got going on. Okay, now one of the final things that I need to do here is I want to add some subtle depth of field. And I'm going to do this, I'm going to fake it. We're not going to have real camera depth of field. So all I'm going to do is right click and add a new adjustment layer. And I'm going to place, I don't want the depth of field to affect the image here. So I'm going to place it below this image. We'll call it depth of field. And I'm going to go back to effects and presets, and we're going to do this very, very easily. I'm just going to go grab a Gaussian blur under blur and sharpen, apply that here, and crank it way up. And now with this selected, I'm going to go grab my pen tool, and we're just going to mask out around it. So I'm going to mask it like this, and then we'll mask it down around here. And you can see we actually need to invert this. So you can quickly click on inverted, or you can just select subtract. And now I'm going to hit F to feather this out, and I'm going to feather it out by like 500 pixels just to see how this looks. We're probably going to need to feather it out a lot more than that. Actually, I just need to bring the blur back down. So we want this to be kind of a subtle. Oh yeah, it's important. Don't forget to finalize this. Then I'll add it to the render queue, and we can render it out, see how it looks. One animation of the Panama Canal that I did last year. I'm going to recreate this. I'm going to break it down step by step, and this is a really fun one because you're going to pull a lot of little tips, tricks, and techniques from this video. I've got my map comp over here in the geolayers panel. I'm going to search for Panama, and we'll just go ahead and download this map feature here, add it to browser. This is the natural earth country feature here. I'll double click to make sure it's perfectly framed up. And now I'm going to go ahead and create a new map comp, and I'm going to leave the default settings here. I already have set the defaults in the preferences. If you remember from before, this is Ultra HD 4K, 24 frames per second with a 10-second duration. And I'm going to go ahead and go with Bing Aerial. Once again, if you're working for commercial clients, make sure that you've got your licensing information cleared. I'm going to hold the control button and click on finalize to finalize one individual frame here so I can look at some nice crisp imagery. Now, for the first step, I want to isolate Panama from the background here so that we can really make it pop and stand out. So to do that, as I've done before, I'm going to go ahead over here to the map comp, and I'm just going to duplicate this map comp. And I want to just duplicate the map comp, not the containing comp. I want to make sure that it's linked, and I'm going to call this one background. This will be our background. Go ahead and duplicate this. And now here in the timeline, I'm going to grab the background comp and the background anchor and actually place it at the bottom. So it's actually the background. Now go ahead and select the Panama map comp. Just to be sure that I don't lose these map features or this map data, I'm going to go ahead and create a new collection here. And I'll call it Panama Canal. Apply. And from time to time, I'm going to export this as a GeoJSON so that I have this archived, properly archived. Next, I want to essentially separate. I want to isolate just Panama, and I'm going to do that by creating a matte. I'm going to use an alpha matte. So grab the Panama map feature here and go up to layer styles. Just make sure you have any solid layer selected. You just want a fill that has 100% opacity, and make sure it's not drawn inside the map comp. We want it drawn inside our containing comp here. Everything else is looking fine, so I will go ahead and draw this feature out. That's going to give me this new Panama shape feature here. I'm going to go ahead and rename it, hit enter, and I'm going to call it Panama Matte. One feature you probably want to, or one setting you probably want to take note of is this max zoom. Make sure you have simplify geometry set to max zoom so that it gives you some nice enough edges here. To actually separate these, I'm going to grab the Panama map comp and I'm going to toggle switches and modes, and I'm going to go over here to the track matte column. If you still can't see this, just toggle this here or toggle switches and modes here. I've seen a lot of people on my YouTube channel saying that they don't see it like this. This track matte was just updated recently in the last couple versions of After Effects, so be sure you've updated After Effects to be able to see this. Now I'm going to grab the pick whip here for track matte and just grab that Panama matte here. Now it looks like nothing happened. However, we don't see the shape layer anymore. That's because it turned the visibility of this off, and this is now set to alpha matte. You can see right here, alpha matte selected. As you've seen from some previous tutorials here, what this is going to do now is if I solo this layer, you can see this is what we have. And if I solo my background, you can see it's just a nice clean plate of our map comp. If I grab the opacity of my background, you can see as I start to bring this down, we're going to be able to isolate this a little bit better. One of the first things that we can do is a simple drop shadow. You know, you might think, oh, just add a drop shadow to your Panama map comp. Now, I could do that. However, it's using this as a matte. So that's going to make the drop shadow effect not really work. However, I could use a layer style, but I'm just going to create a separate individual layer that I'm going to use as the actual shadow. So to do that, I can just grab this layer again and duplicate it, turn the visibility of this one back on, and just rename it, call it Panama Shadow. With this, I'm going to go to Window, go to Effects and Presets, and then search for Drop Shadow. Double click to add that. At the very bottom, go to shadow only so that you have this. And what I'm going to do now is place this underneath our Panama map comp. And now you can start to tweak some of the settings. Like for example, I'll bring the opacity to 75. And if you just start to crank the distance, you're going to see now we have this shadow here. So we'll bring the softness to something like 55 and 55. Let's see how this looks. And now we can change the distance. The direction. We'll add the direction, have it go something like this. That's looking pretty cool. Maybe the softness is a little bit softer. We can keep tweaking as necessary. So now this is popping out. You know, we have a little bit of depth here for Panama. Let's make it pop even more by desaturating this a little bit. So I'm going to go and grab hue saturation, and I'm going to grab this and put it on the background first. And now we can bring this down to something like negative 65 maybe. Let's try negative 65. And I can also adjust the lightness, so maybe we can bring the brightness of this down ever so slightly, maybe something like negative 25. And I'm going to copy this and I will paste it on our Panama map comp as well. And now I'm going to set that master lightness back to 0, and I'm going to set the master saturation of this one to be something like -45. So we want it to be desaturated, but not quite as desaturated as our background. Let's take a look at this. That's actually looking really, really good. So to make this stand out even more, I'm going to add a little bit of a stroke on the outer edge of our country. So for that, I'm going to go back to the geolayers panel. We'll go to layer styles. I'm going to grab this line here. Let's go to edit styles, and we'll call this country border. You can name it whatever you want, thin country border. And I'll go to the stroke, and we want like 1 pixel. Let's try 1 pixel. I will apply this. Now go back, grab Panama again, and let's draw this out. All right, starting to look really good. Now these land areas on the outer edge here on the right and left are quite bright, and they're quite distracting, pulling the attention away from Panama here. So I'm going to add a vignette that I will apply only to the background here. And to do that, I'm going to go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and I will go ahead and rename this. We'll call it Vignette. And I'm going to place it underneath our Panama map comp, and actually underneath the shadow as well. And then I'll go over here to Effects and Presets, and we'll just type in Vignette, and we'll grab Stylize CC Vignette, apply that here, and that should immediately start to darken this up. We can crank up the amount as well, maybe the ink, just play around with it till we get a look that we like. That's looking good. I can always tweak this a little bit later. All right, moment of truth. It's now time to draw out the Panama Canal. So I found a great way to do this is to click on the Add Features to Browser, this little plus icon over here, select Download Features, and right here you're going to see a Natural Earth Global Dataset for river lines. Click on this. That's going to indeed download every river in the world, which is not what we want. We don't want to have to sort through all of this madness. So what you do is you grab the feature collection, and then with that selected, you click on this little button that says Filter View, and now you'll only see these features that you have highlighted here, which includes the Panama Canal. Now you're going to see there's 2 actual features that make up the Panama Canal. It's kind of split up here. So what you can do is you can grab both of these, and you can simply click on this Merge button. Now as you do that, you lose your filter view, so simply click on River Lines again, Filter View, and now you'll see the new map feature here, which is Panama Canal merged. Now I'm going to go up here to layer styles, and I've grabbed this vibrant line, and just make sure that you're not doing something weird like drawing it inside the map comp, and make sure you have individual layers deselected. That's another thing you can do. You can simply draw these out if you select both features, and as long as you have individual layers deselected, it will draw it out as one individual shape layer. However, there will be 2 shape groups. So there's a few different ways that you can do this. You want to be sure that you have max zoom selected, or just deselect this altogether to give you a really nice detailed line here. Now I'm ready to draw out this feature. Make sure you don't animate the feature path. We're going to do that manually after the fact. Okay, now we're going to draw this out, and there we go. Now I have this feature. So I'm going to kind of zoom in here. You can see we have our Panama Canal. Now to animate this, I'm going to go grab the feature, and I'm going to first rename it and maybe change the label here. Now to animate this, I'm going to go and click on the Add button up here and select Trim Paths. You'll see this button's also available down here in the shape group, or the shape layer. So this adds Trim Paths Animator, and now you can move this. If you keyframe this from 0 to 100, I'm sure you've already seen me do this in every tutorial I've ever made. Now watch what happens here as we play this back. You're going to see that it animates out from the middle, and that is because we have these 2 map features that are kind of merged together. So if we open this up, you're going to see that you have 2 individual paths here, and if you select them, you can kind of see they're different. And they have these little icons over here for path direction. So what you need to do is you need to figure out which way these are animating, and then change that path direction. So this one, we want this one to animate. Let's say we want to animate it from the top here all the way to the bottom. So we want this path to start up here, which is what I just did. I moved the path. So now we have these 2 paths animating in the right direction. However, they're animating on at the same time. So we want them to animate on individually. So to do that, you go down to Trim Paths, and you'll see right here it says Trim Multiple Shapes, and you just switch this to individually. So this is a very important feature that you need to understand how it works, and also be aware that it will animate these on. It'll render them from top to bottom. So if I were to move this one to the top, you're going to see that it's going to animate that one on first and then this one on. So you want to make sure that you have these in correct order so that we have a nice line animating. Whew! I know that's a lot, but hey, these paths are quirky. You need to know how to work with them to make it look nice. So there we go. We've got an animated Panama Canal. I'm going to hit the U key. I'm going to grab these keyframes, right click. We'll do keyframe assistant, easy ease. You could just hit F9 for that. But if I hit F9, it stops my screen recorder, so I don't want to hit that. Now I want to be sure to grab that Panama Canal merged geodata feature here and throw it into my Panama Canal feature collection, just for good housekeeping. Now, I don't like to promote a lot of third-party plugins in this course because, it just costs you more money. However, this is a plugin called Deep Glow. So I like to add this to my features here. I'm going to add this to the Panama Canal. Just gives it some punch there. Now, the only reason I'm using this and recommending it is because there is, in fact, a glow effect native to After Effects, but it's really horrible. Now, people are going to tell you it's not horrible, but they're wrong. It's horrible. It's not good. You can play with it and waste your time using it, or you can follow some other tutorials that show you how to pre-comp and blur and do all kinds of crazy stuff. I found that spending the 40 or 50 bucks on this Deep Glow effect from Plugin Everything, I'll leave a link down in the description if you want to go check it out. It just saves you so much time, and this is probably the one third-party plugin on top of geolayers and on top of probably Metal Freeform Pro that I recommend you pick up, that is just gonna give your features some pop. Speaking of effects, there's another effect here called Grid of Crosses. I like to add this here. I'm gonna make sure you have no other layers selected and double click. This gives you this cool little, exactly what it sounds like here, Grid of Crosses. You can come over here to Y copies, hold control and start to crank this up. I want to cover the whole screen here with this. We'll do something like 15, and then we'll go grab this and do something like 30 for the X copies so that it covers the entire screen here. Now I'm going to rename the layer. We'll call it Grid of Crosses, and I'm going to place this underneath our Panama shadow, actually underneath the vignette here. I'm going to make this capitalized so we know what's what, and I'll probably lock it as well. So now we have this Grid of Crosses here, and I want to blend it in a little bit better. So I'll switch the blend mode to something like overlay. Okay, let's take a look here. And then maybe even change the cross size to something like 20 maybe. Now, if you remember the animation, we have these little flickering rectangles, and I like to do this sometimes. It helps motivate an animation right before you're animating into something. I like to add these little effects to just give it a little more pizzazz, maybe give you the feel of like it's scanning the tile sets or something, some kind of satellite imagery that's loading. The way you do this is you grab the rectangle tool, make sure you have no other layers selected. I have a fill here of a solid white color, and what I like to do is just simply draw these out real quick, draw out a few different ones. So we'll draw one here. I'm going to click out so that these draw out as separate individual layers, so we're getting different shape layers here. Now I'm going to be zooming in right at the end of this canal here, so that's why I'm placing them here. To make these flicker, I'll go back to Effects and Presets. I'm going to grab the top shape layer here, and I'm going to search for flickering. These are called flickering opacity. They have at layer in and at layer out. Now, just be aware when you apply these, if you apply them one at a time, they can paste over each other. So what I like to do is grab both and then apply it at the same time by dragging it and dropping it on top here. And now if we just solo this and watch, if we play this back, it's going to flicker on like that. And all you need to do is trim it back. So I'm going to hold Alt, hit right bracket, and that's going to trim it. So now it'll flicker in real fast and flicker right back out. So we can trim this to make it as short as possible. And I can also set the final opacity to be something like 35. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab all the effects for this one, copy them, and then paste them on these other two rectangles, and simply trim these back. And now just offset them ever so slightly, and also set these. Now let's see what we've got here. That's cool. And we may even want to switch these to add or overlay. I like add because they kind of intersect like that. And it's important to parent these. So you want to parent these to your map anchor right here. And we'll parent them to the Panama map comp anchor. And we also want to toggle this switch here and set them to 3D so that as we change the bearing and rotate these, that these will rotate with the map accordingly. And if you want to rename these as well, flickering rectangle. All right, so this is what we've got so far. Now, don't worry about the timing of these animations. Near the end of the process, I like to animate the map comp view here. We'll do like a zoom out and then a zoom back in. And after that step is when I'm going to change and fine tune all the timing of all my other animations, as well as making sure that all of my assets and elements are attached to the map correctly if I want them to be attached to the map, and specifying how I want them to rotate and scale. Now let's focus on adding some text. So I'm going to have three main text elements to start off with. I want to label the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans, and I want to have a main title right here that says Panama. So I'm going to go grab my text tool, and you're going to notice it brings up this properties panel. I just recently updated my version of After Effects, so if you don't see the properties panel, go and update your version of After Effects to see this. So first, let's add the main title. I'm going to click right over here, and I'm going to type in the word Panama. Now, I'm using a font called Airborne 86. This is a premium font that I got from a website called Envato Elements. However, if you don't want to pick this up from Envato Elements, go check out adobefonts.com, where you can browse and view a bunch of different fonts, and you can find something that works for you. And what's cool about that website is you can sign in with your Adobe ID, and it will automatically sync with Adobe After Effects and show up here as you activate those fonts on the website. So with this particular font, I don't want it moving with the map, so I'll just leave it right here. I'm going to turn off the stroke, and I'm going to click on the fill color here, and I have the brightness set to 90, so it's a nice little white color that I've got here. And now I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to bring this over, and we'll type in Pacific Ocean, place it right here. So type in Pacific Ocean, and I want to go down to the paragraph right here, and I want to center this up, and I also want to bring the size way down. We'll do something like 75 maybe. And I'm going to grab this text, and we want to put it somewhere right around here, and now I'll duplicate it. We'll do the same for Atlantic Ocean. If you want to type in Caribbean Sea or whatever, go ahead, go for it. Now I want both of these two ocean text elements to follow along with the map animation. So for that, I need to grab both of them, and I'm going to grab the parent and link pick whip here, and I'm going to attach them to the Panama map comp anchor. And I also want them to rotate and scale with the map, so I need to set them to 3D. So now these are ready to go. They're looking a little too bright, so I also want to take them and place them below my vignette. I want the vignette to be over top of them, so they look a little bit more dynamic. There we go. That's looking a little bit better. And I want our title to be prominently displayed, and it's a nice contrast over here. So I'm going to leave that on top, and I'll go ahead and lock it because I don't want to accidentally grab it. And since we're going to be doing some zoom moves here, I want to add a scale bar. So go up here to Run Script File, select Scale Bar, and go ahead and select Panama Map Comp, and I'm going to put it on the lower right hand side, and it adds it right here. And unfortunately it defaults to a very dark black here, so I'm going to change both the text, bring the brightness up to this white 90%, and we'll do the same thing with this shape layer. Stroke, we'll bring it up to 90 to match that color. There we go. Now we've got a cool little scale bar. All right, I think I'm ready to animate the map comp view now. And as you remember from the reference here, we zoom out really quickly at the beginning, and then it holds for about a second and zooms back in to the very end of the Panama Canal here, one side of the Panama Canal on the Pacific Ocean side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to where I have these flickering rectangles that I've created, and the animation, the zoom out, the initial zoom out, is going to stop about here, and then the flickering occurs, which causes it to zoom back in. So I'm going to go ahead and add some keyframes right here by pressing this keyframe button, and now I'll come back to the beginning, and we're going to do a zoom out from right, we'll zoom out from a little bit more of a scaled in right here maybe. And I'm going to go to the effect controls here, and I'm going to manually change the bearing of this. So we're going to change this to maybe -20 so that it does a little spin as well as it zooms out. So let's just see what we've got here. Spinning like this. Now if you want this to be faster, what you can do is I like to just solo the map comp, so then you can get a quick idea of how it looks. You can also go to Window and select the preview panel, where you can tweak these settings down here. If it's still not playing back, I can have it skip, some frames here, just so I can get an idea for the motion. That's looking pretty good. However, we want this to be super snappy. Well, first we want to add the other keyframes. So I'm going to have this hold for a second. So we'll add keyframes again, and then it's going to zoom back in over the course of like 3 or 2 seconds. And it'll zoom back in to the Panama Canal close up of right about here. Whoa, okay, you got to let it load. And then I'll go ahead and press the keyframe button again as the playhead is over here, just so it adds keyframes to all these parameters. You know, I'm not going to be making any pitch changes, so maybe we can just delete these pitch parameters here, but I will be making this bearing change here. Okay, now I can adjust these keyframes with the graph editor to play with the motion here, because this motion is not how we want it. We just want to tweak it a little bit. Now, the quickest way to tweak this is to just grab the keyframes here and activate the graph editor, and right now it's set to a value graph. So you have the value graph, you have the speed graph. Specifically when you're working in geolayers, I found the speed graph to be a little bit easier to work with, because a lot of the times you don't want to animate these parameters separate from each other. For example, latitude, longitude, and zoom. If you start to animate these separate, you can get some weird results. So what I like to do is switch to the speed graph, and we can just grab all these, and I can grab the handles here, hold shift, and I want this animation to kick on quickly. I don't want it to ease in. I want it to kind of jump in quickly. So we're going to grab the influence here. I'm holding shift so that these move here. So now we have more of a snappy zoom out like that, which is good. And then for this one, we're going to have it do... I'm going to grab the influence of both of these here. And I'm clicking and dragging to grab all of the keyframes. And we'll have it be a snappier animation in the middle here. So this one will ease back out and then kick in like that, which is good. This end zoom is looking good. So I think I'll go with this. The beginning I can tweak a little bit. What I want to do is I'm going to switch back to view the keyframes. I want it to be faster. So I'm just going to grab these and I'm going to pull them in like this. So it's just faster, and I can grab these and I'm going to pull them in like this. Now we have a nice map view animation. And I can also play with the bearings separately here. So I can grab this one and go back here. And let's say we don't want this one to kick on as fast. You can play with it and see if you can get some results that are a little bit better. If you want it to be a little bit smoother here, slower of a bearing change, you know, you can play with that. All right, I'm going to turn off this solo layer. Now we're going to see a multitude of problems that we need to jump on real quick. Now when you animate the map comp view, that's when you're quickly going to see if layers are not attached to the map, if something's looking bizarre, and now you can go through and not only fix all of those problems, but then you can also start to fine-tune the timing and the motion and the scale attributes of all of these other assets. Now I actually want to play this back and take a look at it. Since I want to look at everything together, it's going to be pretty intensive on the system. So I'm going to turn this skip down to 5, and I'm going to go ahead and finalize the entire sequence so that I'll be able to see everything up at the same time. I'm going to turn this down to half so that it doesn't bog down my system every time it just tries to show me a still frame here. All right, let's play this back. All right, the path is animating on a little slow. I want it to be completed right about here, right when the flickering rectangles go on. So first, let's take care of the path. So we'll go to Panama Canal right here, and we're just going to bring this in keyframe here. And let's bring up the graph editor, and I want it to go on pretty fast because the zoom and this animation kicks on pretty fast. So if I have the path animate on kind of at the same speed, it'll be cool. And then right as it ends, it kind of triggers that. And then I also want it to fade out. So on the zoom, I want it to fade out right about here. So we'll go back here. I'm going to hold Alt to trim it down. And then we can hit the T key and animate the opacity and quickly bring this out. Maybe even make it go out a little bit more slowly. I also want to fade out the shadow as well as this nasty borderline, because when you zoom in on it, it just doesn't look great. So I'm going to fade all these out as well. One thing you can do is you can actually add a null object right here, and you can just call it fade out or master fade out, and you can attach a lot of these assets directly here. So you can fade out. If I have a lot of assets that I'm going to fade out, So that's maybe what I'll want to do here. I'm going to go grab these keyframes again for opacity. I'm going to copy those and I'm going to paste them on this fade out and make sure they're lined up like this. And then simply delete these. So we'll grab T here, delete these, and we'll just attach opacity. We'll property pick whip it to this. And so not only the path will fade out, but I'm also going to fade out the opacity of, where is that? We want to grab the shadow. We'll grab the opacity of the shadow. So this will be like a really flat map when this fades out. So that'll fade out. We'll also fade out this border. So we'll grab T, hit T for opacity, property pick whip, attach that there. You'll also notice that the grid of crosses here, it's not attached to the map. So I want to have a grid of crosses for the close-up as well as the wide shot. So I'm going to actually create two different ones. I'll go ahead and lock this fade out so I don't accidentally grab it. So grid of crosses is, where is it? It's right here. So I'm going to duplicate it and I'll call this one close-up, and then I'll call this one wide shot. We'll take care of the wide first. I'm going to go to the wide here. We'll turn off the visibility of the close-up. And I want to attach it here. So it's important where you attach it. So I'm going to attach it to the Panama map comp anchor here, and I'll set it to 3D. So if we zoom in here, you can see that it's now moving with the map. I also want this to kind of flicker on as well. So I'm going to trim it down a little bit, and I'm going to go to Window, Effects and Presets, and we're going to search for that flickering opacity that we used on our rectangles. So flickering opacity at layer in, and we'll attach it there. And also I'm gonna do out as well, because I'm gonna be transitioning between this wide to the close-up. So this one will kind of flicker on right here, and then the rectangles flicker on. We're gonna need to change the timing of these rectangles as well. So these need to come on right here and maybe extend out a little bit. And you can see as they zoom in, this grid of crosses just gets too much. So I'm going to go to where the animation is at its fastest, and you can see this by looking at the keyframes here. And if you look at the graph editor, you can see where it's at its peak speed, which is right here. So I think right here is where I want to transition between these two grid of crosses. So I'll go back down here to grid of crosses. I'm going to Alt right bracket the wide, and I'm going to Alt right bracket the close-up so that these kind of fade in like this. And I'm going to have these flicker in close up. I want to turn the visibility on of this one and turn the visibility, so we want it to be here. So we'll now grab this, attach it to the map comp anchor here, and turn it to 3D. So now if we just solo these grid of crosses, let's take a look. Zooms out and then it zooms in here. So actually for this one, sorry, this is pretty hard to see, I'm assuming. Let me set it to full and have it not skip any keyframes. So this actually needs to be expanded because it's quite, if you look at it right here, it's barely anything. So if we grab this, I can go to X and Y copies, and let's crank this way up. Maybe like 50 or 75. Hopefully this won't bog down our system too much. This is going to need to be like 150. Yeah, this might be pretty intensive. Now I'll trim this back so that we have a nice flicker transition. Okay, those are good to go. So we've taken care of the path animation, we retimed it, trimmed it back. We've taken care of the rectangle animation here. We've taken care of the grid of crosses. I also like to use crosshairs to call different locations out. So click over here, make sure you have no layer selected, then go to Window and open up Effects and Presets. And then if you search for the keyword crosshair, you're going to see 3 different options here. And if you simply double click on them, so I'll double click on brackets, it gives you this new shape layer here. And if I just solo this, you can see it's a simple bracket. And I can deselect that, and now I can double click again, we get this little round one. And so you have different options here. We can rename this crosshair 1, crosshair 2, and now we can animate these separately. And what's cool about these is that I can now, if we animate them separately and then also add flicker in, flicker out to both of them, we can get some pretty interesting results. You can simply position them here and now grab both And I'll attach them, but for these I think I won't actually turn them to 3D so that they will retain their size. So even if they scale, they're going to not rotate, and they'll also just stay the same size. And then I can have them kind of animate off screen as well right here. So I'm going to trim these to make sure that I have them animate on as I like. And now as a final step, I'll right click down here and go to new adjustment layer, rename it noise, come over to effects and presets, do a search for noise, and we'll grab this noise right here. Maybe set it to something like 8%. And I'll probably add another secondary vignette right here, which I can have fade on. So this will be for the close-up. So I'll add CC vignette. And for this one, I want to put it right on the canal here and maybe crank it down a little. And I'll have it fade up right here. We can maybe do a simple opacity transition or something. And we'll have the second keyframe end right when the map view animation ends. So if I look at the keyframes of this one, we can come over here and I can have this ease in, and I'll have this one ease out. As a final step, I like to turn on motion blur. And to do that, I'll full screen this and we'll look at all of our assets here. And you can simply turn on motion blur for everything. A lot of these things don't necessarily need it. However, we'll just do it. Now for the geolayers actual tile imagery, you need to go into the geolayers panel and go to the map comp, click on settings, and then at the very bottom, you'll see this right here, imagery motion blur. So you're gonna have to toggle that on. Click apply, and you need to actually toggle this on for both the background and the Panama map. And if you're using the Map Tiler Premium plan, make sure that you turn this on for your water mask comps as well. Otherwise, you'll get some very strange looking imagery. Okay, now you can see we have some fancy schmancy motion blur. This is definitely gonna up our render time, so be aware of that. Now I'll go ahead and finalize as well. And let's see what we got. All right, this is looking good for a first pass or a first version. So I naturally went through, made a couple of revisions, did a bunch of retiming of these elements, added a few crosshairs, and here is my final result. Very cool. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. And once again, if you want to check out those project files, you'll find those over on the course site. Now I want to show you a few ways you can optimize the settings of both Adobe After Effects and geolayers to make your animation workflow as smooth as possible. Now first I want to talk about finalizing. So in this particular project I have a very basic zoom in here, and you can see that the imagery here has not been finalized. It's very pixelated and low resolution. So if I'm ready to export this out, I can naturally go and click finalize. That is going to download the high-res imagery for every individual frame. However, if I still have a lot of tweaks to make to this particular animation, I might not want to do that because that can take a lot of time. Finalizing all those frames just is a time-intensive process. So one thing that you can do is you can finalize individual frames. And to do that, you just hold Control or Command on Mac as you click finalize, and it will quickly finalize. And you can see in real time how long this takes. Now we have a finalized frame. And if we zoom back out, you can see naturally this is not finalized here. So now watch the difference of how long it takes to finalize the entire sequence here. Now naturally we don't want to watch this finalize in real time, so I'm going to speed this up and then compare them here so you can see the difference in time here that took. Now there's one other preference that I use all the time now, and you can actually have geolayers finalize only the containing comp in the work area span. So the work area is this area right here. So if you go up to the geolayers panel and go to preferences and you scroll down a bit, right here it says finalize only containing comps work area. In many situations I have a sequence that's 10 minutes in length and I'm only working with little like 10-second increments of that timeline. So this particular preference is very, very helpful for me. And I'm pretty sure that this is not activated by default. You have to go in here and manually turn it on, which again I suggest. Using geolayers with Adobe After Effects can be really intensive on your system. If you have a really complex project, just simply playing back your map animation can be very, very difficult sometimes. So I want to show you how to optimize your settings to really increase playback performance. So this is a freelance project that I'm currently working on, and it's pretty intricate. If you look down here in the timeline panel, you can see I've got 65 different layers, and there's all kinds of different assets and elements here. We have adjustment layers, textures, pre-comps of label templates. We have other text as well as shape layer elements. Now, again, when you get this many assets in your map, it makes playback performance, really, really bad, really, really slow. As I move my playhead around, you can see it takes quite a while just to load an individual frame. You can see there's a little blue bar here. And just to, kind of move around, it takes quite a long time. Now, if I try to just hit the space bar and play this back, you're going to see that takes even longer. Now, this is naturally not a great way to work. I want to optimize this. So let me show you all the different things that you can do. Now, the first thing you want to look at is down here. It says frame render time. This is a good, quick way to see how intricate your project is and if it's going to be able to play back pretty quickly. Right now, this is roughly around 5 seconds, which is not very good. That means it's going to take 5 seconds to render out one individual frame. And if you do the math based off 24 frames per second, that's a very long time. Now, these aren't entirely accurate. You see, as I, move the playhead around, these vary pretty wildly. However, it is telling us that this is intricate. Now, one of the first things we can do to help increase playback performance is to change the actual resolution of our composition preview panel here. So this is the preview panel, and it's showing us this individual frame, and it's showing it to us in full resolution. And I know this because this little drop-down menu right here, it says resolution. If you click on this, we can actually downsample this. So I can set this to quarter, and that's going to lower the resolution here. And now as I move the playhead around, it's going to be a lot snappier. So that right away saved us a lot of time. And you can see as I change that, it lowered that time. So if I watch the frame render time, if I bring it back up to full, that time is definitely going to increase. If I set it back down to quarter, it's going to decrease. The next thing you want to look at is the preview panel. So go to Window and select Preview. And this is going to allow you to make adjustments to how After Effects is going to play your animation back. And the two main parameters I make adjustments to are skip and resolution. So resolution is already set to auto, but I'd manually bring this down to quarter if I know that my project is really intricate. And you can also set it to skip. The higher that you bring this, the better the performance is going to be. So I set that to skip 5 a lot of the times when I'm working in really, really intricate projects. And you can play around with these other parameters and see what works for you. I'm going to go back here and I'll just play this back. And you can see it's a little choppy, however, it does allow me to see what's going on and play the animation. I've noticed that in many intricate projects, you usually have 1 to 2 layers that are causing the majority of the problems and that are the most render intensive. So it really helps to be able to pinpoint those so you can turn them off and just allow your system to perform much better as you animate. So to do that, you can come over here and click on this little snail icon right here, and that's going to activate this render time column, which is going to allow you to look at the various render times of each individual layer. So if I scroll through here, you can quickly visualize like this layer right here is causing a lot of problems. So I could turn off this layer altogether, and you see the frame render time significantly got better. See, I'll turn it back on, turn it off. See what a big difference that makes. And you can also use this to really pinpoint what maybe is causing the problem. So if I go to Effect Controls and start to toggle these effects on and off, if I toggle off Water Mask, you can see that that was a big part of the problem. This is a very cool tool. Now, if I do decide to turn this off and keep animating, one of the downsides of this is I can forget to turn it back on. So an even better technique is to use the solo button. Let's say, for example, I'm animating just the route. So in this case, I might just be able to get away with just viewing the route as well as the base map and maybe a few labels. So for that, I can actually use the solo button. So I could come down here and grab the route and click right here, which means solo. So now I just see the route, and now I could come down here and grab World Map Comp and solo that as well. And now things are going to play back much, much, much faster. And now you could come in here and tweak this even more. You could turn off skip frames and maybe even bump up the resolution more if it's going to actually play back now. You can see now you can watch this smooth animation. Now I actually use the solo button quite a lot. Specifically when I'm animating the map comp view, I will just solo the map comp and then do those animations, fly the map around and get the animation tuned in exactly how I like it. And then I will unsolo and bring all these other features back and render it out. You'll also notice that all of these layers have this little motion blur icon activated, so motion blur is on for all of these. Motion blur can be a significant render intensive feature as well. And there's a master motion blur right here. If you click on this, it enables and disables motion blur for all layers. So this is a quick way. Watch what happens. Watch the frame render time as I disable this. You can see significant increase in performance. But once again, this is a thing that you really have to remember to re-enable before you render it out, because if you don't, you're going to render a bunch of animations out and you're going to be like, wait a minute, they look too sharp. What's going on? And it's motion blur, so don't burn yourself. If you're still having performance issues, you can purge cache. So you can do this inside of the geolayers panel. You go to geolayers and then you dive into the map comp settings, and at the very bottom, there's purge imagery cache. If you press this, you're going to need to refinalize. You can also repair expressions if you decide to change the name or have any weird issues going on. I like to repair expressions. You can do this for each individual map comp. Once again, you're going to need to refinalize. And then you can also purge the After Effects cache. To do that, you go to Edit, and then right down here it says Purge, and I always just purge all memory and disk cache. So if you click on this, you're going to see that I have 186 gigabytes. Wow, that is a lot. And one other pro tip, not everyone can afford to do this, but I have an external drive that is set specifically for caching. And you can go into the preferences, go to Edit Preferences, and you can specify and route all of your cache files to go directly to that external drive, which you can then empty out as you go along. You're going to see this is going to take a little bit to empty out this cache. Now I want to show you a few ways you can optimize the settings of both Adobe After Effects and geolayers to make your animation workflow as smooth as possible. Now first I want to talk about finalizing. So in this particular project I have a very basic zoom in here, and you can see that the imagery here has not been finalized. It's very pixelated and low resolution. So if I'm ready to export this out, I can naturally go and click finalize. That is going to download the high-res imagery for every individual frame. However, if I still have a lot of tweaks to make to this particular animation, I might not want to do that because that can take a lot of time. Finalizing all those frames just is a time-intensive process. So one thing that you can do is you can finalize individual frames. And to do that, you just hold Control or Command on Mac as you click finalize, and it will quickly finalize. And you can see in real time how long this takes. Now we have a finalized frame. And if we zoom back out, you can see naturally this is not finalized here. So now watch the difference of how long it takes to finalize the entire sequence here. Now naturally we don't want to watch this finalize in real time, so I'm going to speed this up and then compare them here so you can see the difference in time here that took. Now there's one other preference that I use all the time now, and you can actually have geolayers finalize only the containing comp in the work area span. So the work area is this area right here. So if you go up to the geolayers panel and go to preferences and you scroll down a bit, right here it says finalize only containing comps work area. In many situations I have a sequence that's 10 minutes in length and I'm only working with little like 10-second increments of that timeline. So this particular preference is very, very helpful for me. And I'm pretty sure that this is not activated by default. You have to go in here and manually turn it on, which again, I suggest.